Hey everyone, welcome to day 3 of the Multicoin Summit. Today we're going to be going deep into Helium with Helium COO, Frank Mong. So Frank, can you tell us just like what is a Helium hotspot? How does it work? How does the network work? How do all these pieces fit together?
There's a lot of pieces. So Helium hotspot is essentially the reality of what our engineers dreamed up. Like if you could build a wireless connectivity gateway that created wireless coverage, and for doing so, mine some kind of cryptocurrency, not Bitcoin, but in our case, something we call proof of coverage, all in one box, all in one easily digestible technology. Could we build a vast network, global network that provided coverage everywhere? And the answer to that is yes. Here it is. This is the Helium hotspot, and it took us, I would say, what, three iterations to get to this point, 3-4 iterations. And what this little box that we were selling for, like at the height of the pricing, was like $4.95 when we first launched. It was really that you've got two key things that this Helium hotspot does. One, it provides what we call LoRaWAN coverage. LoRaWAN is an IoT protocol. It's open source. And what it does is it enables this hotspot to listen for miles and miles away for little IoT sensors, like a water leak detector sensor, boring stuff you never think about. And this sensor, if there's a water leak or something in your boiler or by your toilet, would just send a signal. This could be 3-4 miles away and hear that sensor and transmit that data back to the internet using Tushar's like Wi-Fi. So it's got LoRaWAN listening for sensors. It's connected to Tushar's Wi-Fi or Ethernet. And using your home internet, it sends the data back to the property manager or the homeowner, to let them know that their toilet's leaking. So that application and usage is independent of having to build a network. It just works because of this hotspot that's at Tushar's house or your friend's house. Now it's in like, 1,000, I think we're in 1,800 cities around the world where you've got hotspots like this. That's the uniqueness of Helium. It's providing that wireless coverage. And for doing so, it mines the cryptocurrency HNT. And the mining comes in multiple parts. With proof of coverage, you're able to mine cryptocurrency. When it transmits data from IoT sensors, it gets credit for that and it mines the cryptocurrency HNT. And this is sold to consumers. It's sold to your friends and your neighbors, and throughout the United States, North America, Canada, as well as Europe now. So we're selling all over Europe, and it's been quite a ride to go from when you guys discovered us, in our dinky little office in San Francisco, in the worst neighborhood there could be, to having this, in the market.
What are some other use cases in addition to the water leak sensor? What else are people building on there?
So there's in the world of LoRaWAN, it's an IoT. Think of it as an IoT standard. This open protocol. There's, I want to say, 15,000 different vendors in that ecosystem building all kinds of IoT applications and IoT sensors, Internet of Things sensors. I was showing you this Tiktaalik sensor. It's off the shelf. It's like $20. And it senses humidity and water. So you put it on the floor, and when there's water on the floor or humidity that's too high, it triggers, sends a signal alerting a hotspot anywhere that's nearby that can hear it, so miles away, and it will alert and let the landlord or maintenance guy know that, hey, there's a leak, water leak. It's a big deal, by the way. Water leaks is a huge problem globally. I don't know if you guys knew this, but apparently we have a water shortage. And not controlling the amount of water you use and wasting is very costly. So in the case of the example I gave you, there's a company called Nowi in our ecosystem, Nowi, that's building solutions for water leaks. And when they deployed this in Pennsylvania, the landlord reported back that the guy was saving $40 a month just on one sensor from one water leak, one leaky toilet. By resolving that, the dude's going to save $40 a month. That's huge. That's an example. In South Korea, there's a company called Kiko that makes little sensors like this, and this is just a GPS tracker that you would use for your kids. I guess there's a lot of children that just travel around in the subway and go to school, do tutoring, after school, sports. Parents just stick this on the backpacks of their kids and they can just figure out what their kids are. No cell needed, no cell phone needed. You don't have to use Find My Friend. This thing talks and it could talk to a Helium hotspot or any LoRaWAN gateway and get the data back.
What's the battery life like on that thing?
On this, when we tested this, I want to say the battery was probably like a month and a half to 2 months.
Okay, so like really long battery life.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. And then there's this. This is called tabs. So Helium went out and sourced this hardware from the ecosystem from a company called One, and it's a Helium tab. It's very similar to this. You could put this in your backpack, put it in your luggage, put it in your kids, your dog, your cat, and you can essentially track whatever you like. This is GPS, and it sends a signal via LoRaWAN to a Helium hotspot, and it'll help you find your things from miles away. No cell needed.
Can you tell us about the cows? I know that's one of my favorite use cases for this thing.
So we've actually talked to, there's been a couple of agriculture and livestock companies looking at Helium and looking within the ecosystem. And it's not these, I didn't bring it, but there are these massive trackers, or think of them as incredibly durable, that go on the neck collar of cattle. Or there's collars, and then there's like, I guess, things you pierce through their ears where you can, like tags, essentially. They're battery operated, but they're very industrial, and it's a massive thing. And these collars are actually very similar to this. It would have some GPS signal that I can get, and it transmits it to a hotspot gateway. But you could essentially tag or collar your entire, whatever you call it, herd of cattle or whatever you have that you're farming, and you can essentially let them graze and grass-fed and whatever you want to do with it, and you'll be able to track the cattle without a whole lot of issues. But again, I think network coverage is important in that arena. So a lot of what some of the customers we've had, like Agulus, has done. Agulus is an ag tech company. Is they've set up farms with Helium hotspots sitting on like 30-foot antennas where it gets just massive range. And in the world of 900 megahertz or sub-gigahertz spectrum, it's all about height. The taller you can get the antenna, the more range you can have that's unobstructed by buildings or trees and such. And that really helps propagate the signal.
So to be clear, so you can hook up other antennas to this thing?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Can you show people?
Sure. This is the antenna that comes with the Helium hotspot, and this is the antenna that is used for proof of coverage for the Helium hotspot to prove itself on the network and the blockchain. And this is all using wireless signals, but this comes right off, and you could essentially attach an adapter to this and mount an antenna, literally like 10, 30 feet antenna, up on the roof, and you can improve your coverage performance, which obviously improves the ability to hear other sensors, but also drastically improves your proof of coverage capability for mining.
And your mining.
For mining, you can improve your mining essentially. Absolutely.
Yeah, one of my favorite parts of the Helium community is the antennas channel. People are rabid. Just nuts in there, like trying every single combination of antennas. There's so many different varieties, and everyone's experimenting, and it's like permissionless innovation.
It's amazing. Having everything open source, I think, has been a godsend for the company. Just there are so many developers out there that love to tinker, with the ability to actually obtain parts. Everything's open source. Everything's low cost. For them to build it themselves is amazing. And that, from antennas to, we've got people improving visualization of our blockchain. We have all kinds of pretty cool apps showing up. It's pretty awesome what our community has done.
How big is the Helium network today? And where do you think it's going to be over the next few months as the kind of next wave of hardware launches?
We've sold out of our second release of Helium hotspots. We have, I want to say, I don't want to say this wrong, but I think we're in the 500 units range left for Europe, and that's it. And then we're sold out of Europe. But to date, we've sold, I think, over 12,000 units of Helium hotspots globally. We're in 1,800 cities now around the world, and we have I mentioned before these, what you call them DIY hotspots, basically developers building their own version of the Helium hotspot. We have 200 of those now mining on the network, helping us create coverage. And then we're getting about 100 requests a day to join the network, to mine with their DIY setup. So those are some of the major stats I think that are relevant to show the health of the ecosystem. In our developer Discord, we have a Discord channel for developers. We have now, we're getting up close to 4,000 members. They're all, I think, very active, very rabid about what we're doing, very passionate. And then in the entire, I think, Helium ecosystem, we're at about 32,000 community members now. So pretty healthy.
What do you think the network will look like maybe 6, 12 months from now?
I think by the end of the year, we'll be at, over 10,000 hotspots deployed. So I think deployed now is like 9,000 total deployed out of the 12,000 sold. So we should be well over 10,000 by the end of the year. I think by the time this video goes live, everyone would have seen the news that we're actually launching, we're not launching, the community is actually launching a third-party hotspot. It's called a rack hotspot miner. And this device is going to be half the cost of the Helium hotspot, so $250 instead of the close to $500 we were charging. They're built overseas, built from a company called Rack that builds networking gear, so they have volume and scale for all their parts. And there's a third-party distributor called CowChip that is sourcing all of this, independent of Helium, and driving sales of Helium hotspots. I would venture to guess that our network should be probably 25,000 in size by the next 12 months.
And what's that going to represent in terms of like population coverage, like just ballpark?
So just today with 9,000 hotspots, we are roughly covering 1.2 million square miles. So if we double that to, let's say, 18 to 20,000, we should be in that. We should be in that like 2.4, 2.5 million square miles. I think right now we're already probably 85 to 95% coverage-wise in like the 30 NFL cities, with the exception of Detroit. That's the one city we don't have coverage. There may be one hotspot there. We need to work on that. But aside from that, in the United States, there's like the 30 NFL cities or 29 NFL cities are 85 to 95% covered. And our goal is to expand, in as we sell into Europe, really make sure Metro London area is covered well, Stockholm, Zurich, Amsterdam, Lisbon. There's parts of Italy that's going to start lighting up as well. I don't know. I don't know my geography good enough, I guess. It's incredible. And we have this pent-up demand in Asia, in China, Vietnam, Thailand, Taiwan, Tokyo, South Korea, Seoul, Korea. We can't address them fast enough. And so our entire goal and like lessons we've learned is we have to open source faster. We have to enable if we just enable our ecosystem, they'll pick up the work. We can't do enough. It's just not enough time. We have to get the ecosystem to pick up more and more of the work. And when we do that, we just go faster. It's amazing. You get the network effect.
So Frank, you guys recently made your first consumer product beyond the hotspot, which are the new tabs. Can you tell us about Helium tabs?
Yes. So Helium, we created something called the Helium tabs. This piece of hardware itself is made by Broon. It's existing off-the-shelf hardware that you can buy from them. Roughly, I want to say it's MSRP anywhere between $59 to $69 if you were to buy one from Broon. The challenge in IoT, including LoRaWAN, is that most of these devices are meant for industrial use. And that means for the average consumer, there isn't a good UI or UX. It's not pretty. It's not going to look like something that's approachable for the average person if you're not technical. And so what Helium did recently is we took the hardware. There was an opportunity for us to buy a few of these and create a UI UX experience on top of it. Again, we're doing this not because Helium wants to get into the business of selling like tile trackers. That's not what we want to do. But we want to demonstrate to the ecosystem and to the world that LoRaWAN can be very useful for average folks, for the average consumer. It doesn't have to just be industrial IoT use cases, which are valid, which is great, but there's a broader audience out there of millions potentially that could actually use something called, we call Helium tabs, that they can use to track their luggage, their purse, their kids, their dogs and cats, whatever it may be.
Cows.
Cows. But all it does, all you need is a good UI, a good UX that's approachable, that's easy. And this to install is like seriously 2 steps. 2 steps and you're on. And this thing's connected to the network. It just works wherever there's a Helium hotspot. So for all the potential investors out there, like you guys all should have one of these, if nothing else. This is pretty awesome.
And how long is the battery? So you buy that thing, does batteries already in there? How does battery work?
Battery's already in there. So what we did was we cleaned up the firmware, made it for multiple applications, like, as I mentioned before, tracking cows to your dogs and cats, or your kids or purses and something valuable, whatever it may be. It depends on how often you use it. For example, if you tie this thing to your dog and you go for walks and you let the dog run around, the battery will probably last a month. But if you put it in your car and it's meant to like track your car and your car's parked much of the time, then the battery could last like 3, 4, 5 months. It really depends. But it's meant to last longer than a few days or a week.
Tell us about, Amir has a pretty crazy background himself. I wish he could be here, but I know his son has got a fever. So like what's Amir's story? Like he's got a wild one.
I think what intrigues me the most about Amir is he's self-taught for most things in his life. I think he dropped out of college. I don't know if that's widely known. But he did attend for a year or two. He left, I think for good reason though. He was interested in video games and he was interested in programming. I think he was a Quake 2 champion of the world at one point. He knows all the OG champions of video games. This is before esports was a big thing. His US visa has him listed as an esports player. So it's actually on his visa app. He's not even a citizen of the US, so he's got a visa and he's here because he's an esports gamer in the States. And so it's interesting. But that's the world he comes from. And I think he's successfully built a couple of video games. 1942 is one of those. And I think that was sold to EA. And so he's been in a couple of rounds of successes on the video game space. I think at some point he and Sean Fanning met because of Amir's success in Quake. And I think Sean was really into video games as well. And somehow they met at one of those tournaments, became friends. And I think as they were just hanging out and fooling around, the idea of IoT and connecting things, somewhere along the line of their relationship floated up. And I think for both, I think rolled into more of their late 20s, early 30s, I think, a lot of the friends were having kids and that's just how they are. They're tinkerers. They like to build things. And one of the questions that came out was, hey, why don't these IoT things just connect to the internet? Why is it so hard? Everyone's trying to build something. And when you want to build something that connects to the internet and you're not dealing with Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, the only option was cellular technology. It still is for the most part. And it's very difficult because it's proprietary. It's not clear what the code is. You have to get licenses from spectrum owners to participate. So there's a lot of barriers to entry. And I think that's where Amir and Sean thought, oh, there's an opportunity here. And I think that's sort of the birth of Helium.
Unlike most crypto projects, you guys pivoted in the crypto. You started off in 2013, had a long journey. Can you walk us through kind of like what the first few years of Helium's journey was? I
think the first few years, I wasn't there at the time, but the first few years when Amir and Sean were driving this, in the early days certainly, it was like any other startup. There's a lot of search for product market fit, a lot of search for that ramp that's going to kick you off. And I think Helium did try a lot of things. They threw a lot of things at the wall related to IoT. It was very developer, hardware, software centric in trying to onboard IoT devices. I think the challenge and difference at the time was the vision and grand problem they wanted to solve was connecting things to the internet, which means you needed a massive network. But they didn't think in terms of crypto. They did not think in terms of incentive models. They were solely thinking, I think, similar to how wireless infrastructure build-outs work today. It's highly centralized. It's AT&T or Comcast or whoever deciding, oh, we're going to go lay cable, we're going to go add a cell tower. Very expensive, very costly. And in that mindset, Helium tried different verticals. They got into like the hospital sensing space. They tried retail, restaurant, food, temperature sensing, but they weren't thinking, how to actually jumpstart the network. They were thinking more along applications and how to get these apps to fire up the need for something else. And that's just sort of the common approach that all startups take. And that's the approach. Helium went through several iterations of trials, several failures to realize, hey, what we should really do is what we originally set out to do. Why, Vinod and why others decided to invest in Helium. It was to go build an internet connectivity platform for IoT. That's still the gap, right? And that's when I think 3 years ago, I want to say roughly, the light bulb went off. And this is 3 years ago, what, 2017? Is that? Mm-hmm. I think that's when Bitcoin and Ethereum were like on front page news of Wall Street Journal. I think that's when like things, sort of hit the fan at that point. Like, whoa, what's this thing called Bitcoin? Others knew about it for 10 years, but then, the mainstream sort of started reading about the power of Bitcoin and the platform within Ethereum and all the possibilities. And at the same time, our engineers were sitting around going, what are we going to do? Like, how do we build a network? How do we build a massive network quickly with almost no money, with very little money, right? And I think when you're sort of dealing with challenges and tribulations like that is when the best ideas come out. And this is a true story. I think Amir and some of the core engineers like Professor, Mark, Bones, like they were sitting around one night at the office and they were drinking a bottle of Oban. And we still have this bottle of Oban whiskey. And there's one guy say, hey, what if we put Bitcoin into a wireless gateway and it could mine Bitcoin? Could we build a network, like a wireless network that way? And then I think maybe it was Professor, it's too inefficient. Like that would just, how are you going to convince people to put in a Bitcoin miner in their home to provide wireless coverage and expect the payoff to work? It's just sort of, the economics still don't work. And then one other guy said, well, what if we built our own blockchain that could make it work? Like made it very efficient, very lightweight, very green, right? Yet it did what it should do, which is incentivize everybody, all consumers around the world, to build this new network, to connect Internet of Things. And as much as this sounds like an episode out of Silicon Valley, this really did happen. They actually started on that path. Professor built the first blockchain as he's a distributed systems guy. And so he thought, well, I'll go figure this out. I'll build a ledger. I'll build a distributed ledger and see how it works. He said he did it in about 20 minutes. He wrote his own code, 20 minutes, boom, had a distributed ledger and it worked. It wasn't scalable, but it worked. And he's like, okay, it's not that hard. I could do it. Little did he know, for it to scale, it's hard, right? It's very difficult, but he did do it. And that's when I think Amir and the rest of the team thought, oh, wow, okay, Professor can do it. Maybe this is possible. Professor's a Slack handle of one of our amazing engineers, another like college dropout. So great guy. So that's when everything just sort of started to snowball, and I think that's sort of why, as a company, when you first met us, we were an IoT company. We weren't your classic crypto company, right? Our thoughts and our background was really wireless oriented. We have a lot of peer-to-peer distributed systems capability, but we weren't thinking about the power of what a new incentive model or a power of a blockchain allowing the ability to leverage a mass group of people could do.
Shar, do you want to talk about the actual deal and putting the deal together with Helium? I know that was quite an effort.
So it was interesting because when we saw Helium in 2019, it was this weird thing that didn't make sense for a lot of investors, right? Like you said, because the traditional VCs didn't really like it because you didn't make money yet. And at Series C, like that's very hard to raise. Yeah. And then the blockchain VCs didn't really like it because the blockchain stuff wasn't well defined, the economics weren't well defined. And so I remember when I saw it for the first time, I was interested because it's like, this is a new type of proof of work, right? And so that was really the core of my interest at first, was like, this is proof of work, but useful, not just wasting a bunch of electricity to do a bunch of hashes. It's creating a wireless network, but then also the work, it validates mining activity and creates this cryptocurrency. So that was really cool. But then we had to think well, why will it accrue value?
Right.
Do we want to just think of it as a store of value thing like Bitcoin? And do we want to compete against Bitcoin on that? And no, you're not going to beat Bitcoin. It's going to be very, very hard, and we don't need another store of value currency thing. That's not interesting. So we actually ended up spending about 3 months before even signing a term sheet, designing out the economics. And so we did a bunch of legwork to design out the token economics. We applied the burn and mint equilibrium to the Helium network, which it uses today. And once we had the economics figured out, then we were like, okay, this is investable now. And I think that because we had done the work of looking at this thing that didn't quite fit and didn't make sense for a lot of people, but then we tried to solve the core problem of why it didn't make sense. And we were able to get buy-in on why it didn't, on the solution for that problem, that we were able to develop the conviction to invest. And then also, go out to USV and some of our other partners and say hey, I think this one is really interesting. It's different, it's unique, and it really fits the vision of using blockchains to coordinate useful economic activity. One thing that I want to add to that was really interesting, though, on the deal structuring side, is Helium already had raised venture capital prior to that round, and that was in traditional equity. And so that created some issues, actually, because we didn't want to have investors in two different boats, rowing in different directions, where one is oh, make everything open source and everything easy to access, and don't worry about IP. Let's build this as wide as we can. And that would be the view of the people who are invested in the network. And then the people who are invested in the company would say, no, I want to extract as much rent as possible. I want to have IP and licensing costs. And so we did a bunch of work to actually structure the deal in such a way that everyone was in the same boat. And so, Google Ventures was already in the cap table, Coastal Ventures was in the cap table, Firstmark Capital, a few other prominent venture funds and other more traditional investors were in the cap table. But getting them into the same boat was really key, I think. And I mean, I think a few of these gray hairs are due to that deal, actually. So by far the most complex deal I've done. And I think it was worth it, though, because now everyone's aligned. Everyone's going in the same direction. Everyone's trying to build the same network. And so I'm glad we did the work, though it was a lot.
Yeah, I think it was probably the first deal of its kind where you had a mix of equity and this new crypto asset. So I think that was pretty hard. It was pretty hard on the legal side, at least.
Yeah, there was that, and then also we wanted to do this, fair launch idea. So we wanted most of the crypto to be mined. We didn't want Helium Inc. to just
That's right.
pre-mine all of the tokens and then own them. And so integrating that as well was interesting. And so, I'm very happy with the solution we found.
From our go-to-market perspective, in the area where we want to attract users of the network, the best thing you guys did for us was the burn and mint equilibrium by introducing the concept of you can have a mined token, which is the HNT, but to use the network, it doesn't have to be HNT. It could be another token, essentially, a second token, in this case a data credit, which is really no different than AWS resource credits or Google Cloud credits, same idea. And that really opened the door for us in talking to large enterprises where they don't have to touch the crypto if that's not in their wheelhouse. If they just want to use an available network, they can. And it's in the form of data credits that they can purchase with a corporate credit card or subscribe to it and just have it refilled whenever, like any other cloud provider. That was genius.
Oh, the stablecoin.
Very
data
genius. Whatever you
credits
want to
in
call it, stablecoin, resource credits. It's essentially turned this Helium decentralized network into network as a service from an enterprise point of view, a corporate point of view. And for them, it's like, oh, I know how to consume that because I already consume cloud resources. I know how to consume a network as a service resource. And that, for us, was game changing. Because then we had a way to talk about this weird crypto-built network that works.
Abstract
Yes.
all of the blockchain-y stuff away.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the cool things about Helium is that you don't need to know what a blockchain is or care. It's all hidden from you.
It is.
And I really like that because while I like blockchains and I like the technical details, like most people don't want to deal with any of that stuff. They just want to like use a service. And so by making the cost to use the Helium network dollar denominated, like you're saying, and by hiding away all of the bits that use blockchain, I think that made it much more accessible
Completely.
for end users.
Absolutely. It really, because I think part of the challenge for a lot of large enterprises and corporates that want to connect IoT sensors is that they're conditioned to think that they have to build it themselves. And that's part of the cost. And I think that's really been a huge limiting factor of that growth, of just growing IoT. The cost is so high to just build enough connectivity to be able to connect everything. And I think this idea that, well, you don't have to build a network. What does that mean? You might not have to build it. You don't have to. It's already built. It's already there. Just turn on a sensor, deploy it, voila, you get your data fully encrypted, fully secured, right? To them, it's like, wait, you actually built that? Like that was a dream of mine someday. Yeah, someday this could occur. And so for many enthusiasts and many folks in IoT world, they've had this dream, like if they could just connect this stupid IoT sensor and it would work, that would be the dream. And that, for a lot of them, now is true. So it's pretty exciting.
So Charlotte, let's talk about like mining a little bit and just like the kind of global interest in mining. What are you seeing, or I guess what have we learned about the kinds of people who want to get hotspots and get engaged in the system?
So one thing that's cool is it's not just like a bunch of crypto people. Like this is really market expansionary to the point that like we're seeing people who are interacting with crypto for the first time because of Helium, because it is so easy and they bought this device and they put it up and maybe they're IoT enthusiasts, maybe they're engineers, maybe they are radio enthusiasts. There's like a lot of ham radio. There's like a big community. And so they get involved and then they discover, oh, this thing mines HNT and HNT is worth money. And so something that I think is really cool is this leverages financial bubbles. And I don't think Helium's in a bubble yet, but it will be, right? It leverages financial bubbles to create physical capital. So an example that I'll draw is to the late 90s. There was obviously a huge tech bubble, and a lot of people forget about the telecom bubble that happened at the same time, where we laid an incredible amount of fiber optic cable around the world because of basically this financial bubble, which was incentivizing people to do that. Then, when you look now, like actually we're still using all of that fiber optic cable. The financial bubble like went away. Obviously, we all know what happened in 1999, 2000, but it actually created a ton of utility, which enables the modern internet as it works today. And so actually, I think that's something that's going to happen with Helium is I think we are going to see a crazy financial bubble, and it's going to leave behind the physical infrastructure for the future of the Internet of Things. And that's something that I'm pretty excited for. I don't know when it'll happen, and like I hesitate to make timing projections, but this relationship between financial bubbles and physical capital is one that I'm very, very interested in.
Interesting. Like the way I look at it, which is I think similar to what you said about how easy it is to get into crypto with Helium, is what really excites me. I mean, I mentioned this is a consumer product. We truly sell to consumers. When we look at our buyer profile of who's buying this, you can't skew it in any direction. It goes everywhere from like really early boomers to like Gen Xers, millennials, and this Gen Z crowd, super young, college grads. And so when we look at our profile, who's buying this? How do we target them? How do we get more? We couldn't. I mean, there's, I think, some underlining commonalities. They're either into IoT, they consider themselves like the Coinbase audience. It's easy to kind of onboard and buy. They might have some Bitcoin, maybe they bought some Ethereum or something. But the fact that you can just buy this, receive it, download an app, and seriously in like 2-3 steps, set it up. I think it's mind-blowing for most crypto mining in the world of mining, where you have to set up rigs. It's expensive. It's very costly. Lots of power. This is 5 watts of power, and your mom and dad can do it. That's how easy it is. And I think that is where we hope we've helped in bridging this whole new audience into crypto.
Yeah. One thing that's important to note is that it's unlike early Bitcoin mining, which was supposedly you're supposed to do it at home. You can't make ASICs. No. You can't centralize the mining for this. It's specifically designed to be impossible to centralize, because it's not, oh, let's do more hashes per second and then mine more crypto. Actually being physically separate really matters.
It does.
And being in population dense areas really matters. Yes. And so if you need devices that are physically separated in a population dense area, you are going to get a good spread.
Yes.
And actual decentralization, as opposed to having 3 mining pools control the entirety of a network or something. So I think that's really cool too. And to riff on that for a second, I think that's one of the underappreciated strengths of Helium is actually the very, very wide token distribution.
Yes.
And I think that's really, really valuable, because it means that everyone gets to participate. Right. My biggest critique of proof of stake coins, and we've invested in several of them, but my biggest critique of proof of stake coins is it's the pre-mine. Like, you create them all at once and then you sell them. Right. And so the thing that I really like about Helium is that it is very distributed token supply.
That's by design, just because of the nature of what we were trying to do. It kind of goes back to my point earlier. We're trying to build a global network for connecting IoT devices everywhere, as many places as we can. To do that, the incentive has to work for everyone. And it has to be, I think, reachable or attainable, both, I think, intellectually, technically, but also economically. It has to just be, within access. It has to be accessible to them.
All right, so Frank, can you tell us a little bit about the Helium Patron Program?
When we first started out, rolling out the Helium network, I think one of the ideas maybe you guys told us about is we should actually come up with something, a special badge or something, if someone wants to come in and help us build out a city. We do sell to individuals, but if there's someone that was an entrepreneur or was really interested in Helium and wanted to be a creator of a network in the city, enable them to do so and create some kind of badging system or recognize them somehow. And then I think we've got up to like 100 now, folks or entities or entrepreneurs or groups that are super focused on building out their city. They get a special badge because they basically buy, it's like 15 hotspots or more, and they're considered a patron. And what that really means for others that are interested is that you basically get a phone call with Helium. It used to be, I used to do all of them, and then Mark on our team did them. Now it's Laura helping us doing that. We just have too many requests. And so a number of us will get on the phone, talk through about how it works. We've got some templates on how to track your hotspot and how to sort of talk to your potential neighbors about it, if that's the approach. And there are other, I think, folks that have come online that are patrons that have created entire websites. We have like 6 or 7 groups that have created businesses out of this, where they just set up a website with relevant information. You can sign up for a free hotspot, and then you divide, or it's like a division of token rewards or something like that, and everyone gets to earn something. And so those are I think amazing like network effects that we've gotten. Like a lot of the network in some of these key NFL cities was as a result of patrons helping us. And the other side effect of patrons, which I just remembered, is we'll have conversations with a customer. And in the case, I'm trying to think which one can I talk about? I think we were rolling out a test with, I'm trying to think, we were somewhere in Michigan, we were testing Helium. I don't remember the customer's name now. They wanted to test asset tracking they rent out generators essentially, or like if you have like a water damaged home or building, you'll need to get dehumidifiers, and you'll need to rent a bunch of equipment to go salvage that building. These are heavy equipment that you can rent from folks. There's a company that does that rents the equipment. They have a problem where they're not able to find the equipment. So it gets rented out, and it's tracked literally on spreadsheets or pen and paper. And you forget or you lose your record, and you just sort of leave a multi-$1,000 piece of equipment in someone's, some construction site. And so what they did was they wanted to attach, it's called a Digital Matters Yabby. Yabby is a little industrial tracking device made by a company called Digital Matters in this ecosystem. They wanted to buy a bunch of those things, which are about like $60, $70 each, attach them to $2,000, $3,000 pieces of equipment, and use the Helium network to track those. It's some town in Michigan. I can't remember the town right now. And they didn't want to build a network. This is perfect. Well, we didn't have a strong network there. A patron stepped up and said, I'll provide the hotspots. Like, tell me where. I will send the hotspots. Like, they will have a network wherever they need it in that city. And that relationship between patron and potential usage of the network was sort of this side effect that we just did not expect. And it's actually a pleasant surprise to have that kind of support.
And so how many patrons are there now?
I want to say there's over 100 now.
And all in the US, or they?
Majority in the US. We're getting new patrons coming in Europe. We have a big group out of the UK and Italy, another big group in Portugal. That's why I mentioned Lisbon. I think they're based out of Lisbon. And then there are groups, I think, that are forming out of Sweden, Netherlands, and Germany. So there's quite a few popping up.
That's awesome. And some of these people have got like 10, 20, 30, but some of them are even like larger than that, right?
I don't want to disclose specifics, but there is a patron that has over 1,000, I think, that they've purchased over time. I don't know if they want people to know that, so I'm not going to say who. But there are patrons up there in the hundreds. Yeah.
I think it's really cool that you're enabling these, like, it's almost like owning a telecom small business.
Yes.
Right? Telecom is now just a big business in the traditional world, because you have to spend billions of dollars on spectrum. You have to provide the entire nationwide network yourself. Here you can say, oh, I'm going to own the telecom network for a city. And like, people can do that. You can provide effective telecom coverage. Like, we did it for Austin.
Sure.
Right? Like, okay, it wasn't just one of us, but like, it's like a small business
That's right.
type effort to go and cover a medium-sized city like Austin. And I bet you could cover a large city like New York with, just a few of these small businesses, versus needing to be a, $200 billion behemoth like AT&T.
That's right.
That has to cover the entire country.
That's right. This reminds me a lot of, you referenced the 90s before, kind of like the 90s when ISPs were a thing. There's Net Zero, there was CompuServe, like when the internet.
Earthlink.
Maybe you guys weren't even born yet, but when I was in like college or high school, Earthlink, like, you had these ISPs pop up that were just basically reselling bandwidth, but it was dial-up. It wasn't always connected. It was dial-up bandwidth. This is very similar to that world where there's an economic incentive to actually create networks for IoT, and we're in those early days right now, just because those devices don't have a way to connect. And so the same thing that happened with ISPs and like dial-up is happening with Helium and these patrons essentially.
Cool. So Tushar, there's this thing called the DY Alliance, which is separate from Helium Inc. Can you tell us what that is and what it's working on?
Yeah, so it's called the DY Alliance because it's really the Decentralized Wireless Alliance, but we thought it was cool to have a play on DeFi. And the DY Alliance is there to provide more independent governance of the Helium network, further decentralizing it, making sure that it's not Helium Inc. that's in charge of everything, and stewarding the network towards decentralization. Right? Decentralization isn't a binary thing; it's a spectrum, and so we want to make sure that we're moving in that direction and opening things up, safely. And so the DY Alliance is capitalized through several partners and donations from the community. And one of the things that I think is really cool is that we're able to go and make grants and bounties. And so actually, the first really big bounty that we've put out there is for someone to build a decentralized Wi-Fi network on top of Helium. So, right now, when explaining what Helium is, I think we sometimes default to saying it's a network for IoT. I don't think that's actually what Helium is. It's a subset. I think what Helium actually is it's a new business model for deploying and managing wireless networks. The first one happens to be an IoT network because that is the most underserved market. But the core of what Helium is it's a blockchain that is specifically about providing incentive to create wireless networks. And the economics of the blockchain are specifically designed for that goal, and that goal only. And so the Wi-Fi network is really interesting because that's the next big opportunity, in my opinion, for a decentralized network, because it's one where telecom can't compete. We want to compete asymmetrically with big telecom, where it's unlicensed spectrum, because the Helium network can't go and negotiate with the FCC and its equivalents in all these other countries. Who's going to negotiate? No one can represent the Helium network on their own. That person doesn't exist. It's like trying to get Satoshi to negotiate something, right? And so going after Wi-Fi, I think, is really interesting because it can create an incentive for people to not only provide this very long-range, low-bandwidth IoT network, but also in the same device, or using an existing Wi-Fi router or using a device that combines these two things, provide very high bandwidth but shorter range Wi-Fi coverage as well. That once again is paid for using the Helium tokens and accrues value back to the Helium network. So we have the LoRaWAN IoT network. Hopefully, as this bounty gets filled, we'll have Wi-Fi as well. We have some proof of concepts already, so that's really cool. And then I expect to see other wireless networks built on the Helium protocol as well. Maybe we'll see something like a really low-cost 3G network. That tech is so commodified to provide the gateways. It's really inexpensive, and it's good enough for a lot of use cases. I mean, it was good enough for me 10 years ago. So, I'm sure that there's a lot of people in the world who would love to have that ability, right? Or maybe we see something 5G, on the other end of the spectrum, because 5G is just too capital intensive for the traditional telecoms to efficiently deploy across the United States, because they need too many radios. They just can't afford that much real estate. But if you can get the real estate for free because people are putting these radios in their homes, and you don't have to worry about backhaul because they're using their home connection, and then you have massive redundancy through the Helium network, well, maybe Helium can do 5G in a way that's asymmetrically competitive with the legacy telecom companies. So that's really the future that DY is very excited about and is excited in stewarding into existence.
So Frank, you started rolling out the Helium network on August 1st of last year. So it's a little more than a year old now. There's a lot of hotspots now all over the world. That's the supply side of the network. So let's shift gears and talk a little bit more about the demand side of the network. What are the companies around the world that you can talk about that are using Helium or that are about to start rolling out stuff on the Helium network?
We've had customers that have explored Helium prior to Helium switching and adding the crypto aspect. We've also captured quite a few companies that have tested us in the scooter sharing world or the bike sharing world. They've all tested on the Helium network, whether it be in San Francisco or Austin, Texas. That's where we had the best coverage to start.
Well, Frank, thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to come chat with us. We really appreciate it. And we can't wait to see where Helium's going to go.
Thank you, guys. I mean, like I said before, you guys are the most active investors we have and the most helpful investors. Everything from economic models to getting your hands dirty and getting out into people's homes and installing the first network in Austin, Texas. We're blessed to be part of your portfolio, so thank you guys.
Thanks, Frank. Appreciate it.